To be human is to be utterly flawed. To be human is to be trapped in a scope that is limited, unable to grasp the true shape of the universe or dictate one's fate. To be human is to forever be at the whims of alien elder gods, no matter how hard one may try. But there exists a phenomena, an event that rocks the core of human history. It is a rare event that few have witnessed, but all have felt. The ascension of a true god. Humans that by choice or circumstance are uplifted and racked by a violent metamorphosis. And in this process they are reborn, remade into something that is beyond human. Into the true gods of humanity, the ascended gods. To be shepherds for a new age. Hello and welcome back to the Stygian Study, Seekers of Profane Knowledge. Tonight, we are going to be discussing what is the most fascinating part of all in Fear and Hunger lore to me, the Ascended Gods. Those mortals that, by wills greater than our own, were remade into true divine beings, with the strength to rival the old gods. Now, make no mistake, these are not the self-aggrandizing new gods. These are far more potent beings, and we have several of them. However, as always, before we jump into the meat and potatoes of this video, we must lay some groundworks, as the Ascended Gods are anything but simple. We must define what they are, what ascension is, and define concepts such as the death of the old gods, and syncretism, and other fun things that I've been developing. Disclaimer for the whole video before we start. I'm going to bring up religions a few times, and those religions, it would be Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, Yoruba, Santeria, Aztec traditional religions. I bring these all up with absolute respect to the cultures that own them. I bring them up with respect of the people that practice them. If I state something that is incorrect, or I accidentally misrepresent something, please do not hesitate to check me in the comments. I am very open to learning. I am no religious scholar. I research these things out of pure passion and respect. So, again, if I accidentally step on anyone's toes, know that I am deeply sorry, and I will amend it. I also want to preface that this video will contain a good amount of synthesis, and potentially some non-canon information. I know. I usually like to stick to the hard canon information for these videos, but we have so much information on these deities through things like environmental storytelling and dialogue that we have to use in order to paint the full picture. As such, there could be some hiccups and or inaccuracies based off of my own interpretation, aka the skooma I'm huffing while I'm writing these scripts. Furthermore, once we get to this section defining the Ascended Gods by name and form, we will be analyzing their domains, that is to say their main governing force, their followers, their methods of worship that we know of, just like in the Old Gods video, and it is in that section that I will be using the most amount of synthesis. So, without further ado, let's dive straight into the preamble. So, what is an Ascended God? I know he stated that they are simply humans who became true gods, but they are a bit more than that. And to fully grasp that, we have to look at a few things. For one, many of the Ascended Gods are born from some sort of divine intervention, or at least the old gods have had their hands in the event. Look at All-mer, who we've discussed before on the channel. If we are to believe what Enki states about All-mer's conception in his Skin Bible, it can be understood that 𝒞𝒽𝓀, an old god at the behest of Sylvian, designed All-mer from the ground up to be the perfect human, and thus he became the very first ascended god. Likewise, the little girl from Fear and Hunger 1 somehow had an ancient soul within her, which contained the essence of an older god, that being the god of the depths. And she is a child directly born of a new god, so she contained the essence of divinity from the start. Finally, we have Logic, who has machinery that is directly contained in the realm of rare, as well as maintaining some form of physical presence within the realm itself. So, to say that an ascended god are simply humans who found ways to become as powerful as old gods is not entirely accurate. But in best terms, it may make more sense to say that ascended gods might be incarnations of older gods, with one exception-ish. The process of ascension and incarnation is perhaps the oddest part of the entire process, as we have very little idea of what actually creates an ascended god. However, my analysis of the series leads me to believe that the nature of ascension is much like that of incarnation, where the soul of an old god transfers either its entire being or a portion of its being into a new form. The main piece of evidence we have for this is the little girl from Fear and Hunger 1. Her body was the vessel for an ancient soul, and souls in the universe of Fear and Hunger are incredibly important, as they assign certain aptitudes and ability from the moment an individual is born, such as skills in warfare, survival, or sorcery. In this case, the ancient soul granted the little girl the ability to become an ascended god. But this process to become an ascended god cannot be achieved without certain conditions being met first. And these conditions? Well, we're not quite sure, as unsatisfying as that is. My hypothesis is that the process of ascension can only occur after a great deal of trials are overcome, or the human vessel suffers enough trauma to awaken the god within. All-mer had to be killed, and had to sever a piece of himself away in order to truly ascend into godhood. The little girl suffered her entire mortal life in the belly of the dungeons of Fear and Hunger, in constant darkness and under the influence of the god of the depths. She only ascended after her body ripped itself apart several times over whilst at the altar of darkness inside the corpse of the god of the depths. Sulfur was born as a result of All-mer sundering his consciousness in half and casting it into the sulfuric pits, where he's kind of said to have burned forever. The only seeming exception of this is Logic, but this possible exception is born from the lack of information we have really about her ascension and how odd of a deity she really is as the, artificial god. Another factor of note is that somehow, someway, the essence of an older god needs to be present in order to facilitate the transcendence process. This is again illustrated by the fact that the little girl needed to be as close to the god of the depths as she could possibly get in order to ascend into the god of Fear and Hunger. And Logic has a cube artifact buried within their chest that is defaced, which is that of 𝑉𝑛ushka. And we have covered the god cube artifacts and how they are incredibly powerful items that can warp reality itself and contain some essence of the god, or at least the green hue, within it. So the fact that Logic was born from a defaced cube artifact may highlight some evidence that 𝑉𝑛ushka was being drained of their essence to birth Logic, but we will cover that more later. The only deity who we don't have any concrete idea as to who they are based on is All-mer and Sulfur. However, as many community members have come together to guess, the sun god, or Amon to some individuals, might be the best guess. Who that deity is someone I have not covered because what we know is from speculation. Some astute members of the community have uncovered information, and I should note that while I talk about Amon the sun god for a brief bit, it should be noted that this information comes from data mining, cut content, general synthesis. Not to say this invalidates the legitimacy of the hypothesis, but it does add some pretty gigantic asterisks to it. In any case, what comes out of this event is an ascended god, a human body that transcends reality to become the equivalent of an old god. Now, as I stated earlier, I believe these ascended gods to be the incarnations of old gods themselves, a fractal lens of a deity and not a new deity entirely, and the lens that these deities have taken on is born from humanity itself. So no longer do we have the inhuman concept of rot and decay, but now we have the concept of decay of civilizations, pandemics, vermins, destitute areas, and forsaken middens. No longer is it the god of divine order and cosmological order, but now it's the god of humanistic order, civilizations, law, justice, and religion. Each god is the embodiment of a concept metamorphosized to become human, which in the universe of Fear and Hunger would be possible, and I believe is likely, because we know the gods are based on thoughts, perspectives, and immaterial concepts. So the idea that a deity would take on a new form based on human thoughts and concepts is not out of the realm of possibility. And, in my view, it's much like the process of real-world syncretism, though with, a fantastical twist. And syncretism is the phenomena for when different mythological, cultural, or religious ideas are blended together to create a new system entirely, redefining deities or religious laws. Think of how the Greek pantheon became the Roman pantheon, or how Yoruba, a West African spiritual practice, evolved into hoodoo and Santeria during the slave trades, turning the Orishas, which were the spiritual entities that serve as a guide for humanity within the tradition of Yoruba, became equated to the saints of Catholicism as a way to keep their traditions alive, whilst hiding them from the prosecution of the church or oppressive governing powers in the area. Or how Yahweh, the storm god and war god of the Canaanites, became God with a capital G in Judaism, then evolved into Jesus. In this specific case of God becoming Jesus may actually illustrate the phenomena from Fear and Hunger the best. You take the God of the Old Testament, all the fire, the brimstone, and whatnot, then evolve that entity into Jesus and the New Testament. And in this evolution, we see what best describes the ascension process from Fear and Hunger. Just stay with me. You take the same exact entity, but you see its messaging and appearance change with the passing of the ages, shifting from that of righteous retribution to that of forgiveness. This application of the divine message is altered by the deity's own command. Of course, I am no religious scholar. Hell, I'm not even a follower of the Abrahamic faiths. I just read a lot. So, with the preamble done, and the groundwork laid for what my perspective is on these ascended gods and how they even reach ascension, let us now dive into the big meat and potatoes of this video, the reason you're all here. Let's talk about the ascended gods. And first up, I have covered much of All-mer's history in the previous installment of this series, and if you haven't watched that, go watch that. It does add some context. And thus, I won't cover it in as much detail here. However, I will cover the basics. As we all know, All-mer was born in the city of 𝒞𝒽𝓀, a mortal man handcrafted to perfection by the mysterious old god 𝒞𝒽𝓀, as per Enki's Skin Bible. And as a man, All-mer spread his words of unity and preached of an older time, one in unison with the old gods. And so profound were his words that they unified people across nations, across origins, from all walks of life. The people adored All-mer, with the exception of the kings of old and the new gods. They rejected All-mer, and in their rejection they had him tortured and crucified. But this pain, this death, was not the end for All-mer. No. Instead, through this, All-mer ascended into the realm of the gods, Mahab, and it was here where his true trials began. This is the part of the legend no one knows of, and fewer still would divulge. Except for one. There is a man within the realms of rare, in between the realms of the mundane and divine, a shadowy man who stands in eerie silence, watching you craft idols. This is the man in black, and in the realm of rare, if he spots you crafting these idols, he will tell you a story of how he once witnessed the mighty All-mer crafting idols himself. And in his words, this was to give physical form to the darkness within All-mer, so that he might cast it out and truly ascend. And in this ascension, he would lead humanity to a brighter future. And eventually, so tells the man in black, All-mer succeeds. He crafted a perfect idol, so that he may confront his inner demon and transcend for all mankind. All-mer defeated his counterpart, and rose a god. A true god. And with that godhood in hand, he marched onto the mortal planes and carried out a decimation of the world that only could be described as divine. Kingdoms were laid to ruin, new gods overthrown, and a new world order established. The sign of the cross, once a symbol of torment and death, now a shimmering idol of worship and a reminder of All-mer's power, and thus has his church reigned for millennia, and it has stood tall, unshakable. All-mer, a true example of what mankind can become when they cast off the shackles of their humanity. Or so we've been led to believe. Quick note on the sun god. I mentioned him earlier, now it's time to talk about him a little bit more. After watching several theories by several other creators, I have come to believe that yes, All-mer is an incarnation of the sun god. The Cliff Notes reasons as to why is A, aesthetic similarities between the two. 2, both of them are builders of empires and social orders. The sun god is likely to have created Mahab, thus the domains as we best understand them are equated. And finally, C, I believe both of these deities have this nasty little habit of splitting themselves into two halves. But of course, who I think the sun deity broke off to is a whole different story with a whole different other case of skooma I'm saving for that day when I decide to write it. And if you want to learn more about the sun god, please go watch 𝒤𝒄𝒽𝒀𝒨's video on it. He does a fantastic job breaking down why he thinks that way and why 𝒿𝒻𝒻 really is connected to the sun god and what the sun god's possible domains were, as well as having a name for him. So again, go check that out. You don't have to watch it to finish this, but check it out when you get the time. So, 𝒿𝒻𝒻. What could your domain possibly be? It's not directly stated in any of the games, and thus we have many different ideas on what it could embody. There are some saying the concept of order is best fitting for his domain, and there's a good amount of evidence for this, and I would tend to agree, but with a little bit of an asterisk. So I personally believe that the domain of our dear 𝒿𝒻𝒻 in his original form is simple. It is humanity itself. 𝒿𝒻𝒻 in both of his forms represent humanity in its totality, but 𝒿𝒻𝒻 himself, as I stated or alluded to earlier, was split, and as such his domain has been split right down the middle. We will get to his counterpart soon, but from how I see it, 𝒿𝒻𝒻 is a representation of order but within humanistic identity. So when I say order for 𝒿𝒻𝒻, I am talking within the lens of humanity. Think governments, law, organized religion. I mean, when he returned to the Earth from Mahab, the first thing he did was tear down the old world, conquer it, and establish a new world order that still continues to this day. He creates social order. His religious doctrine carries heavy themes of justice and punishment, that which can control the unruly and curb chaos. Furthermore, he believes heavily in the severing of unsavory parts of human personalities, not through force, mind you, but through self-policing and confession, which is just one of the multitudes that are embodied within humanistic order, that which would be discipline. His followers also must adhere to that strict doctrine that suppressed the self just as he did when he severed his psyche. He believes in discipline as a means to enlighten the soul. In this realm of enlightening oneself, 𝒿𝒻𝒻 also values sacrifice, which is a key component of any authoritarian identity. One must be willing to sacrifice for the greater good of the whole, and this comes across in spells like Inverse Crown of Thorns or the fact that his crucifixions were done in his name as a means of sacrifice. 𝒿𝒻𝒻's worship is plentiful in the games. Unfortunately, we don't have any written rituals, but we can infer quite a bit from what we do see in the games. For one, obviously, prayer is a very acceptable form of worship to 𝒿𝒻𝒻, and he will take and give willingly. He seems to have a strict method for doing so, and that can either be written down or spoken aloud, as evidenced by the empty scrolls, which I don't think are a real power he has, but I'll talk more about them later. We also know that crucifixion as a means of sacrifice is completely acceptable for 𝒿𝒻𝒻's worship, as seen by 𝒞𝒽𝓀 sacrificing himself upon the cross in Fear and Hunger 1 before deciding to journey into the dungeon. Consequently, we can also sacrifice a crucifixion victim within the entrance of the dungeons of Fear and Hunger, which raises our affinity with 𝒿𝒻𝒻 by 1 full point. The enactment of judgment and retribution is a methodology of worship for 𝒿𝒻𝒻 as well, but not just by violent means. We can see that confession is a totally valid means of worship and is a form of self-policing. And as we can see in Fear and Hunger 2, which also, again, raises our affinity with 𝒿𝒻𝒻 by 1 full point. Finally, although this topic will be covered in greater detail in the next deity because it's way more relevant to him, pain is a method of worship for 𝒿𝒻𝒻's followers. The Penance Knights were agents of the Vatican, and the pain that they experienced was explicitly said to cleanse the mind, body, and soul in order for them to fight more efficiently. This is in line with methods of crucifixions also being used for worship. Again, pain constantly seen as a way to purify and enlighten the soul. Now, a note on follower. There are way too many followers, and 𝒿𝒻𝒻 has the most amount of followers in the game, just because he's the most prominent deity within the human populations. So I will list off just a few of note, such as our dear friend 𝒞𝒽𝓀. Now, technically, as a dark priest, he worships every god, but he seems to have a special affinity with 𝒿𝒻𝒻, not only because he was inspired by his story to go to the dungeon, but also because he was determined to give up his own life in 𝒿𝒻𝒻's name. And Marina and Samari, our toxic Yurei duo, are both worshippers of 𝒿𝒻𝒻, as they have both stayed at the Vatican and studied at their institutions and are very familiar with their doctrines. And, most mysteriously of all, the man in black, a past friend of 𝒿𝒻𝒻 in life and likely one of his followers and or prophets. He still speaks of 𝒿𝒻𝒻 fondly from beyond the veil, although he does chastise the current 𝒿𝒻𝒻 for splitting himself into two distinctive halves. Now, let's talk about the powers of 𝒿𝒻𝒻, one of the most fascinating things to discuss with any of the deities, and I will chat about empty scrolls just a little bit. I don't consider them canon. Empty scrolls were a mechanic, but not a phenomenon that should be taken literally. And, like, reasons for this is because you can literally just give yourself entity souls, and I don't think 𝒁𝒻𝑒r has that power to just take the souls from people and give them just straight to you. I think they were more just implemented as a fun little cheat code or way to make the game experience easier, something you could high roll for in the runs. They were sort of part of the elements of roguelikes. They are cool though, but they, like I said, they warp the game so much to an intense degree that I personally do not believe that it is literal power set. However, it does key us into the possible aspect of his power, which is that of transmutation and alteration. He has several spells that deal with transmutations of elements into different objects, such as his hidden spell in Fear and Hunger 1, Simple Transmutation, which can turn water into wine and moldy bread into, well, more moldy bread. It's a reference to the miracles of Jesus. It's a spell that is very straightforward in its application and incredibly useful. It highlights how, through 𝒁𝒻𝑒r, one is provided for. The rules of nature can be bent. With Phase Step, we can walk through walls and teleport short distances at the risk of breaking our own reality. Or take Blood Portal. Through dedication to 𝒁𝒻𝑒r, one can open rifts between ritual circles that would connect one participant to another, and travel great distances in a matter of moments. Or Blood Sword, which conjures a drop of blood from 𝒁𝒻𝑒r himself to take the form of a sword that deals otherworldly damage. 𝒁𝒻𝑒r bends the rules of reality towards the player, giving them an edge in battle and outside of it. The Empty Scrolls themselves are an illustration of this, but of course they do not go to the insane degree that they do inside of the games. There is also one more spell that I think deserves to be highlighted, and that is the Inverse Crown of Thorns, which is a functionally useless spell in game. You summon the Crown of Thorns that 𝒁𝒻𝑒r once wore, and it pierces the skull of the caster, ending their run. And in the background, you can hear a faint laugh echoing. Now, what I think this spell is actually accomplishing here is a little odd. For one, this is the final spell 𝒁𝒻𝑒r offers you on his tree for max devotion, and I believe it is for a reason. Yes, it could just be for a funny little joke, but I think there's something more unique happening. I believe that 𝒁𝒻𝑒r is giving the pain that turned him into a god to his followers, so they might be closer to him. It's outright a question asked within the description. So he does this so that his pain might wash over the followers, and that they might move closer to godhood themselves. It is spiritual transmutation, not physical. It requires a great sacrifice from those who channel such immense power. 𝒁𝒻𝑒r is a deity of tyrannical, humanistic order. He embodies all that order can be. The providing of materials through food, community, or weaponry to defend oneself, while at the same time embodying that which makes order oppressive, demanding sacrifice of one's personality, one's body, and embodying authoritarian elements such as justice that is dedicated to retribution, an eye for an eye, oppression, and discipline to a degree that requires one not only the suppression of oneself, but the outright division and expulsion of elements that do not make one human in the first place. And if 𝒁𝒻𝑒r represents these elements, what could his discarded half represent? When 𝒁𝒻𝑒r ascended, he carved out for himself an idol, a play figure for which he could condense all his unwanted being into. And born from his subconscious thoughts, his rage, his bloodlust, his resentment, an idol of darkness coalesced. And from this action, a being emerged, and was subsequently cast into the darkest pits ever known. It was supposed to suffocate down there. It was supposed to die. It was never supposed to obstruct the new perfect world that 𝒁𝒻𝑒r was going to create. And all that darkness would be forgotten. The ultimate sin. But something different happened. It grew. From hate, from rot, from ruin, and from fire it grew into a different breed of savior, one whose light comes not from the shimmering stars above, but from one's own immolating flesh. And this god's name is Sulfur. And in secret, he has slithered beneath the earth in a pit no one can find, subtly influencing mankind, reaching out to them in their bloodiest, darkest moments, offering them a new path, away from the preconceived notions of the world, unbound from morality of lesser beings, freedom in its purest and most chaotic form. and in his blasphemous ambition, he has manipulated his followers to hijack the festival of Termina from the god of Rare in order to create new champions for his cult, in order to achieve whatever his twisted goals desire. And in Fear and Hunger 2, it is he who orchestrated the festival of Termina, and it is he who has his claws sunk deep into the bunkers that hold Logic's terminals that could awaken another ascended god. But for what reason? No one knows. If All-mer is order taken to its most humanistic extremes, then Sulfur is the god of humanistic chaos, the sundered half, the mirror, the opposite. He is the complete mirror of All-mer. He rules over humanity, or at least he wishes he did, but he rules over mankind in a more emotional way than his counterpart. However, instead of creating a perfect humanity, the way that All-mer is attempting to, Sulfur is giving humanity the gift of self-empowerment, self-perfection, and freedom in that light. However, this is done by recreating the suffering that he and All-mer both went through, both in the sense of the crucifixion and in the sense of having your entire worldview turned upside down so drastically that it alters you as a person. Where All-mer asks you to kneel and suffer through the pain of expunging elements of yourself for the greater collective, Sulfur asks you to burn so bright and so hot that none of the old inhibitions remain, so that all that remains is a charred survivor with willpower unmatched and a new form to boot. So in my view, the core element of Sulfur's domain are that of self-empowerment, freedom, and chaos. 𝒞𝒽𝓬 outright states it to us during Ending C. The Sulfur god will use the suffering to transform followers so that they might become their true selves. And all the followers we see of Sulfur have been empowered in this way. Each of them have physical forms that far surpass what normal humans are capable of, and even in death do their bodies stay so resilient that they almost feel alive. That element of freedom is compounded by the fact that so many of the Sulfur followers are joyous to a degree. They're laughing constantly, even if it is devoid of life. Furthermore, the Sulfur followers also seem to enjoy art, as it were. They create things, even if they are grim and profane. Where All-mer represents the harsh rule of law and societal order that provides stability, Sulfur is the rejection of such notions, freedom taken to a sickening extreme. The worship the Sulfur god accepts is that of pain, both inflicted upon oneself and upon others. His followers go out of their way to spill blood in the most profane of ways, even creating new life, all so that it can suffer more. However, what the Sulfur god seems to appreciate the absolute most is succumbing to one's most depraved desires. He wishes for his followers to relinquish their fears, their inhibitions, and unleash the monster within, as that is what he perceives to be the truth of mankind. The methods of worship we have come to see thus far that count for Sulfur are copious blood sacrifices, and I mean by the bucketful. Entire pools filled with the stuff, and for what purpose this serves is unknown, though it likely serves as an awakening for the fallen god, or maybe it's just pure sustenance to him. Another method is by living in one's unbridled truth, and by the suffering of the devotees. This is not an unheard of type of worship in real religious spaces. Of course, not to the same cartoonish degree that Sulfur inflicts, but this is a real practice. Pain as a mean of self-transformation is used in Christianity. Flagellation was used for spiritual purification, which in itself was a form of transformation. Even confession itself could be seen as inflicting emotional pain on oneself to cleanse the soul, or long-term fasting during Lent or other holidays, which are also meant for cleansing and purifying the body. Which, if you think fasting isn't a form of self-inflicted pain, I don't know what to tell you. Buddhist monks will also fast as a means for higher enlightenment and purification, and in Christianity's counterpart, Satanism, or Luciferianism or demonolatry, one of the three, pick which one, spiritual pain is often seen as a true element of self-transformation that would lead to a deeper sense of self and thus gaining the ability to dictate one's life. In some branches of theistic Satanism, spiritual pain is seen as a good thing. Many would view the suffering endured by the devotee to be the mark of a transformation occurring, and merely old, useless aspects of oneself being burned away. We can also again touch upon 𝒞𝒽𝑒𝓐, wherein the practice of scarification in certain regions is commonplace, and the process of scarification does not only signify which 𝒞𝒽𝓻 one follows, but the process itself is seen as a test of devotion, bravery. Sacred pain is a very common tool to develop a greater sense of spiritual empowerment. It is also occurring in Aztec spiritual traditions, where religious bloodletting would happen to some degree. Some would pierce their tongue or extremities with stingray barbs to let blood and to show one's spiritual authority. So yes, sacred pain is a thing, and in the context of All-mer and Sulfur, it's very evident that pain is sacred to both of them. And this could be derived from the very act that made them, the crucifixion and the sundering of their being. And in our real world, sacred pain is very real. Though, the torturing of other people as a means of worship to any deity is not something we see in the modern era, nor should that ever be condoned. Nor will I say, do not inflict pain upon yourself. Don't do that. Just have to add that disclaimer. I'm merely just speaking on the facts of what is. Now, let's get back to Følger and talk about some of the notable followers of Sulfur. Needles. Needles was a prolific doctor in life named Baron Einar von Dutch. I think I nailed that. And was the father-in-law to Dan, who possessed a special fascination with Sylvian and was known for his unorthodox methods of healing. Sometime right before the end of the Great War, the second one, the good doctor ended his own existence in a ritual to Sulfur, which involved him inflicting great wounds and burns upon himself and the sacrifice of his daughter Elise, the wife of Dan. This process sent him and her to the sulfuric pits, where they both underwent a transformation. The metamorphosis molded him into this clown-like figure we see here with a hulking mass of muscle that he uses to stalk the streets of 𝒞𝒽𝓐 and slaughter the contestants one by one if he still gets a chance. Stitches, the daughter of Needles, her namesake of which is derived from her propensity to stitch victims together into grotesque amalgamations of body parts, and the fact that she's partially sewn her own mouth shut. As I stated, she was once the wife of Dan until she was sacrificed to the sulfur god, which sent her to the sulfuric pits, after which she emerges as the entity we see now, with a more muscular body who uses the bunkers of 𝒞𝒽𝓐 as her own personal laboratory and testing grounds. 𝒞𝒽𝓐, the previous winner of the Festival of Termina some time ago, and one of my favorite characters, even though he's an absolute monster. And during that Festival of Termina some time ago, he was a follower of Rare, and he likely is still to some degree, as he still needs to be able to conduct the Festival of Termina and use his access to dream powers and the realm of Rare in general. But he still vastly prefers the Sulfur God. 𝒞𝒽𝓐 is the architect of the Festival of Termina, occurring the way it has and extending its duration past its normal limits, and is the man who has guided us throughout our journey, ushering us to spill greater and greater amounts of blood. In the end of the game, he reveals that Rare has abandoned humanity and the Earth, and that the Sulfur God remains, and that the Sulfur God remade him long ago into the man you see now. He is very talkative for a Sulfur follower, and regales us on why we should accept the gifts of the Sulfur God. He possesses the knowledge possible to send us straight to the Sulfur God in order to us be remade into one of his champions. Needless to say, 𝒞𝒽𝓐 is one of the most potent Sulfur followers we meet, and likely one of Sulfur's champions. The Crimson Fathers. So these things are either a creation of the sulfuric pits themselves, or weird monsters that worship him. They specialize in hypnotism and parasitism, possessing whoever they can. They speak in vague terms and can project mental images straight into the minds of those of who they wish to communicate with. These images being the visage of the Sulfur God himself and the sulfuric pits themselves. Miro has stated that these guys appear after an intense amount of bloodshed, and are much like slugs appearing after a heavy downpour, which is why we find them only in the basement of the Church of All-mer, which is really the Church of Sulfur. This is a not confirmed one, but the death masks. I believe that the cackling maniacs who sleep in coffins and chase people down with machetes that possess super strength that have a pulse even after they've been dealt lethal amounts of damage might just be followers of the Sulfur God. They check all the boxes. Psychotic, no inhibitions, do not care for their own wounds or the wounds of others. They have superhuman physiology, and they have some decent defenses against the otherworldly thanks to their death masks. It's not an absolute guarantee, but I do think the death masks are followers of Sulfur. The Dark Priests and Father Hugo, pretty much the entirety of the Church of All-mer in 𝒞𝒽𝓀. Fun fact, the Church of All-mer, they're all Sulfur worshippers, and 𝒞𝒽𝓀 itself has long since been a place of Sulfur worship, or at least there's hints of it in the forest. However, while I note this, I do think the Church of All-mer and 𝒞𝒽𝓀 was once a place of All-mer worship for a time, and I think the infiltration of Sulfur worship was something that happened naturally over time, since 𝒞𝒽𝓀 itself was a place where Sulfur was worshipped quite frequently. Also, Father Hugo's a vampire, ? Marina teases this. I don't think he's a vampire in the traditional sense, but he is incredibly old, and he is rumored to bathe in the blood of children. So add that to the list of things Sulfur might allow you to do. Okay, so you have to hear me out on this. I think possibly 𝒞𝒽𝓁 was at one point in time aware of Sulfur's existence. If you attempt a marriage with 𝒞𝒽𝓁 in Fear and Hunger 1, he will set you ablaze and claim it is a worthy offering for the fire god. Now, while we don't see that Sulfur himself uses fire, I would not put it past Miro to add that in. You can also look at it, instead of being a god of controlling fire, it's a god of literally being on fire. Sulfur is the burning god. And allow me to point this out. 𝒞𝒽𝓁 has many beliefs that are in keeping with the Sulfur god. He rages against any form of imprisonment, any form of societal standards or inhibitions. He believes that the only way for humans to really achieve their destiny is not by finding a perfect world order or creating a world order. He believes that humanity should strive for chaos and only chaos. And humans should only do as their desires lead them to do. There is the strong, there is the weak. That is it. Now, it's not a 100% thing, but given the fact that 𝒞𝒽𝓁 knows way more about shit than he should ever know about, it's possible that he discovered Sulfur a long time ago. And I have to say, I don't think he's a Sulfur worshipper, but I think he greatly agrees with Sulfur. I think the viewpoint of Sulfur and the not bowing to societal expectations, not bowing to order, that the gods don't really matter and you should use them as tools in the end, I think these are developed from possible encounters with Sulfur, maybe when he was immortal. It's just a hunch, so take it with a grain of salt. But this is just kind of like a personal thing that I see as being true. Also, he does immediately recognize Sulfur's sigil in the White Mole apartment. He immediately calls that out, and he immediately pins down that the Church of All-mer in 𝒞𝒽𝓀 is actually a place of sulfuric worship. So, just kind of points in the corner that he knows a lot more about Sulfur than anyone else in the game. In terms of power, we do not fully know the limits of what Sulfur is capable of doing, or what he's capable of granting his followers. And that's because we only have one spell for him, which is Longinus, which allows the caster to manifest a visage of the spear that pierced All-mer's side long ago, and was to cast down into the sulfuric pits. So, also hints at the possibility of transmutation similar to All-mer, which wouldn't be surprising considering they are two halves of the same whole. However, this transmutation seems far more focused upon the self, metamorphosizing the physical body through flesh crafting and fire to create incredibly powerful physical forms for his devotees. And it seems whatever magical powers they gain after that are up to them. We've seen his followers using powers from all the old gods, and 𝒞𝒽𝓁 doesn't even use any powers he's gained from Sulfur himself. He's using Rare's gifts against you the entire fight. And on that note, it could be why they seemingly favor physical weapons and physical combat, using syringes to intoxicate victims, makeshift weapons for close quarters, or even sidearms. They do not possess many magical abilities for him. Sulfur seems to praise the self-sufficiencies of oneself. So the only gift he seemingly gives his followers are those physical forms to act as a baseline. However they wish to shed blood or spread his words is completely up to them and on them. Hopefully, the update provides us with more, because I really would be curious to see how this god actually manifests his powers in the real world. It was a long time ago now, in an age shrouded in mystery. The year is 1600. Humanity has been at war with itself for centuries now. The new gods of the Fellowship have risen and supplanted the rule of the old gods. The world is stuck in a state of constant warfare, hatred, and in this world, even the divine have begun to rot. And in the country of Rondon, a child was conceived, between the hero of the people and a man of prophecy, 𝒞𝒽𝓁, and the new god of the endless, 𝑁𝒏𝒨. Both of these beings held humanity's best interests at heart, and both of them wanted to build a better world. Neither of them expected how this would occur, though. 𝒞𝒨 gave birth to a little girl who carried within her an ancient soul in the city of 𝒞𝒽𝓐, and it is unknown through sheer ignorance, negligence, or just a cruel twist of fate that the little girl, born destined to carry the light, was utterly consumed in darkness. You see, the city of the god was buried beneath the now infamous dungeons of fear and hunger, its namesake being wrought from the supernatural sense of terror and starvation that set upon all who dwell within it. The dungeon was a place of utter corruption, and even the most noble of humans who stay within it for too long fall underneath its sway. All manner of crimes were committed within its walls, and all manner of horrors were born. It was truly no place for a child. Yet, she survived. Somehow, some way, she survived the horrors, enduring the darkness. 𝒞𝒨, seeing her child trapped and tormented, pulled the strings of fate and summoned two individuals to come to the dungeon in hopes of saving her. 𝒞𝒽𝓁, the mercenary of the Eastern Sanctuaries, who came to secure a better life for him and his wife, and 𝒞𝒨𝒃, the dark priest, who, right before his death by crucifixion in the name of All-mer, was given a vision to him that called him to the dungeon. And by a twist of fate, two more joined their ranks. Ragnvaldr, the hunter from the country of 𝒿𝒚, came seeking vengeance, and finally, 𝑑ars, the knight who came to save her love from imprisonment. No matter their goals or desires, they would all serve in one purpose: to bring that little girl to the source of the corruption in the dungeon of fear and hunger, the corpse of the now forgotten god of the depths. Travel into the abyss of his body, and to the altar of darkness itself, where a new savior of mankind would be born. What arose was the god of fear and hunger. This new terrifying god was a savior born of darkness, rot, and pain, and her gifts were thus. She would unleash a new era of pain onto humanity, known as the Cruel Age, an age of plagues, vermin, and starvation. But she was a wise god, and did not grant humanity more pain than it could bear. She used these outside forces as a motivating vector for humanity to grow, and thus they did, inventing new technologies to defeat her darkness, and the hungers within it, new medicine to combat the plagues, artificial light to hold the shadows at bay, and weapons to slay the monsters of ages past. She became the shepherd of the lost. She is the blessing of strife, the hardened survivor, and the guide of all mankind. Cruelty with kindness. And long did she reign until the 20th century. The god of fear and hunger is an incarnation of the god of the depths, and thus her domains are similar in nature, though with a few additives. She rules over the strifes of humanity, and specifically the rot within human civilizations. Hunger and famine are within her purview, not by creating hunger or fear outright, but wherever these sensations exist is where she exists. So when a famine is there, she will exist within that feeling. She's not creating it. Fear. Now, again, I say this is not primal fear of nature. That's more within 𝒞𝒽𝓁's realm. But she is the fear humanity holds within itself. She is what we as a species are horrified of. Darkness, rot, the collapse of our civilizations, the starving of our loved ones. And this fear is not something she creates inherently, but is the emotion that she dictates. And she uses these spheres as a motivator for humanity to lash out at these existential forces like a cornered animal being hunted. Perhaps the most vile portion of her domain is her governing over the force of rot itself. And it's not rot that occurs within nature. This is not the decay that happens to a carcass out in the wild. The scavenger beetles, the carrion birds. No. This is the decay that creeps underneath city streets. This is the abandoned supermarket that has meat just left in there to become breeding grounds for bacteria. It is where the destitute dwell, the rot of the flesh as an unkept wound begins to fester and necrosis spreads, or the corruption of the very soul once good men fall to corruptive influences, becoming vectors for the societal decay. This is what she rules, and this is what she dictates. Hence her symbolic rule over rats. Speaking of rats, she also governs the Forsaken. The greatest similarity she shares with her previous incarnation is her dominion over the lost and forlorn. The huddled masses in the sewers of 𝒞𝒽𝓸 clinging to what light and sanity they can muster. They are children of the god of fear and hunger. The woodland creatures who become ostracized for spreading disease and maledictions. These are the children of the god of fear and hunger. They are safe under her care, and she can teach one how to commune with them. And in this game, this manifests as her reaching out to grant us moments of respite. As we have established, the god of fear and hunger is a deity who rules over the outskirts of human civilization, the forgotten and unkept corners of the world. So, needless to say, we haven't seen any of her churches for her or statues for her. Seemingly, the god of fear and hunger is very little in the way of requiring worship. She is a god with no temples. You organize cults, if any, or any religious texts outside of the Skin Bible. Thus, we have very little idea of how she is worshipped, or if she is worshipped in the same way other deities have been worshipped. However, from what I have gathered from playing the game, is that the god of fear and hunger exists in a state of always being available. You do not need to be a devotee or memorize scripture. Her worship exists in action, particularly the action of surviving or welcoming hardships. In letting these events shape you, turning pain into a new source of power, utilizing the gifts of fear and hunger to make you a stronger individual, one capable of surviving when the trappings of civilization begin to fail, becoming someone forged and strengthened by the rot around them. She will always be there for humanity, for her domain exists in our greatest fears and failings, the immutable qualities of our creations. And thus, she has no need for temples, no need for great books or prophets, for she is everywhere, rooted beneath your feet, like a great mycelial colony waiting to sprout mushrooms. She exists from the smallest pothole in the road to entire abandoned city districts. These will be her temples, and as long as there is an aching in your belly for food, she will always be with us. As for who may be followers, we've been able to identify the following, and by we I mean me, alone in my bedroom. The Ratkin. Who are the Ratkin? Well, they are rat humanoid creatures who dwell in the foundations of decay and the sewers of 𝒞𝒽𝓸. They are cowardly and crafting, thriving on ambush tactics and subterfuge. Skaven moment. If one possesses the Mastery Over Vermin spell, you can reason with them, and once you reveal you can speak with them, they will begin to call you Master, just as the insects did in Fear and Hunger 1 when you spoke to them with the Mastery of Insect spell. The Ratkin also give you the Small Things Amulet as a peace offering and also an offering for you to go away and never bother them again. This amulet depicts a rat deity of some sort that the Ratkin reveres. This amulet itself raises agility, which is the same stat the god of fear and hunger increases with her skill tree and her engraving. The amulet description also notes that this is for the sake of survival, which is within line of the god of fear and hunger's domains. So whatever this rat deity is, I believe it's just another face of the god of fear and hunger, not a separate deity itself. Remember, the gods of fear and hunger are entities that exist in the mind, and thus they can be depicted in many different forms and fashion depending on who's viewing them. Take Sylvian, for instance, who manifests in several different appearances over the game, and none of which depict the terrifying tentacle monster we fight in the void, the Rat Hag. In my eyes, the Rat Hags were previous followers of the god of fear and hunger who became moon-scorched in 𝒞𝒽𝓸. Their dominion over rats is a prime reason why I think this, and their ability to cast Mistress of the Rats, which is a real name for a group of rats, by the way, which is a max level God of Fear and Hunger spell, and her ability, just summon rats each turn in combat, which is both adorable and awful because they give you infected bites. And this is the only human follower of the God of Fear and Hunger that we can come across in-game, by the way. Just fun little note, we don't see many humans who actually revere her. Moonless! The best girl is here, and while obviously she's not a full-blown follower of the God of Fear and Hunger because she is just a big old puppy in the end of the day, I mean a really big puppy, I do think that the God of Fear and Hunger remembers Moonless, and Moonless remembers her, hence why I think she's taking refuge in the foundations of decay. This is admittedly a headcanon sort of thing, but I wanted to mention it here because I do believe they still hold some sort of connection. It might even be why Moonless is still around and why she got so goddamn big. It's a shame we can't pet her like before. And sadly, that's it in terms of followers, but as we've stated, she exists in all of humanity. As far as her powers go, the God of Fear and Hunger prioritizes survival. She raises the agility of her followers so that they may avoid danger with greater efficiency. And this trait can be gained through both engravings and maxing out her affinity and the Small Things amulet. Her powers also deal with fleshcraft and the profane, animating severed limbs to fight for you and casting rot on opponents, taking away some of their max HP and disfiguring their bodies permanently. Oh, and while this spell isn't released yet, I do want to cover the new spell for her coming in the update, which allows the player to summon a murder of crows to scoop them up and drop them in a random location. Her spells, her power, her entire being is dedicated to the careful balance in the game of survival. And her spells that she grants her followers embody these traits. And in a meta sense, she executes this by giving players the means of saving their games in Termina without moving the clock forward at all. So yeah, she's the GOAT for that. She is the rotting savior of mankind, the shepherd of the lost, and the painful engine of human progress. But I mentioned her reign only truly lasts for a few hundred years unchallenged. So, who is taking her place? As we have long since established in this series, humanity has endlessly struggled against the order of the universe, and thus the gods themselves. Humanity has longed for a savior, a promise, a power that would put them on equal footings with the gods, and finally level the playing field between creator and creation. And in Fear and Hunger 2, humanity at long last has found their savior, logic. The project to develop logic began years ago, during the dawning of the First Great Wars. Started in secret by the Kaiser, the idea was simple: the creation of a device that would meld the power of human mind and soul with machine. And after many decades of work, the machine god was close to completion. And so too were the Kaiser's plans. What the Kaiser did not expect, however, was a young woman by the name 𝑒𝓚𝒽𝒻, who the Kaiser held as a person of special interest, and was actually recruited to help build logic. She was a member of what is known as the Nameless Liberty Underground, the NLU, a group of freedom fighters who infiltrated many different governments across Europa and was trying their best to sabotage the Kaiser's efforts. And 𝒚𝒽𝒻 knew all too well what the project was to the Kaiser, and during the Second Great War, the Eastern Union had willingly succeeded preamble to the Kaiser, not knowing what was beneath, and seeing this, 𝒚𝒽𝒻 and the NLU acted quickly. They made their way into Logic's holding facility, the White Bunker, which is a place that seemingly borders on the other world somehow, determined to hijack the project from the Kaiser. You see, Logic is an invention of immense power, and in order for the machine to be activated, it needs a human host as a central processing unit, and many souls for the god to empower and conduct its own operations. So 𝒚𝒽𝒻 and the NLU agents, with her, plug themselves in, and with 𝒚𝒽𝒻 acting as the main central unit. And once inside, she reaches out into the world with holograms and cryptic message to guide her twin sister Olivia and the other Termina contestants to descend into the very secret bunkers across preamble to activate the logic terminals that would act as the external power, bringing the god fully online. And when Olivia and the team of Termina enter the core of the White Bunker, whoever you decide to recruit, what they find after beating the false god the Kaiser is the machine god itself. A towering monolith of pulsating machines, unbelievable heat, adorned in heavenly attire, the savior of all mankind at long last. There, they battle briefly against the god to no avail. Even when it reveals its true form and what has become of 𝒚𝒁, the machine then opens itself, 𝒚𝒁's cyborg features on full display, welcoming the party into the new artificial green hue, the Promised Land. After this, the game ends, and the Festival of Termina ends with less fanfare than expected, and the new god Logic is awakened. The domain of Logic is human artifice, collective knowledge, and human potential. Logic is the very embodiment of human artifice, the one weapon humanity has had against the cosmic forces of the universe. The power we have to take our reality and mold it to our will for the better, and for the worse. Logic is the embodiment of that force. Hence, why I think she holds Venushka's cube in her chest, although defaced. They are taking the power of nature itself in order to help feed the burgeoning power of a newborn god made of mankind's own devices, twisting nature into a new aspect, an inverse aspect in truth, one that brought humanity to war with the old god in the first place, where once there was earth, spirit, flesh, blood, now there is metal, code, wire, and electrical currents. Logic embodies all of humans' artificial creations. Even the green hue emanating from the inside is artificial, not of the true Mahab. And this artificial green hue is likely stemming from her second domain, collective knowledge, as she is the amalgamation of many human psyches, and souls being processed into hard data by 𝒚𝒁. There's a document explaining how that works. And the green hue itself, which is made up of conscious thought, is the embodiment of all thoughts everywhere. It is the astral realm of pure thoughts. So the machine replicates this by turning many minds en masse into data to create a green hue. It is a collective, artificial, universal truth, which 𝒞𝒽𝓁 even comments on as being incredibly impressive that they even accomplished that. And by this logic, Logic itself will eventually possess all human knowledge and all human thoughts all at once. Currently, at the time of recording, the worship of Logic is a complete mystery due to her being a newborn god who was made at the end of the game. However, I am of the mind that being Logic is supposed to be an anathema to religious thought. She will not require worship. She will only require function. She will only require those to operate within her circuits. Any knowledge given to her, any technology that has used this is, in short, a, unquote, form of worship. So I'm exceptionally curious to see how this will play out in the future games, and I'm exceptionally curious to see how Logic is going to be developed when we get the eventual update. I'm hoping we get to see some engravings from her and seeing what stats she likes to raise, because at this point in time, it's just a complete mystery. This is unsatisfying, but the true extent of Logic's power is unknown. She dictates all machinery in the world one way or another. She can cast gigantic bolts of red lightning, manifest holographic moths to assault targets, and speaking of those holograms, she has the ability to project semi-digital pictures into hard reality to guide people, and this was shown when 𝒚𝒁 was manifested in individual bunkers leading people to Logic terminals. And this was executed before she was fully operational. She also possesses some sort of simulacrum of the powers of creation and destruction, alluding again to that Venushka connection. She is draining the powers necessary from the child of creation and destruction to then usurp those powers and turn them into humanity's powers. So Logic will have the power to create, destroy, and process information, and digitize human souls and consciousness into a hive mind of sorts. She will kind of become like supernatural internet, at least to the best of our understandings. And in the update, we do know we are going to actually be able to fight Logic followers, which I'm very excited about, because, good lord, this deity needs more time to bake and more for us to see. Also, while I know it's a little unsatisfying that the Logic section here is really short, I would like to assure everybody, Logic is 1000% going to be getting her own video, because I have a lot of individual thoughts on her, and why I think she's very cool, but why I don't exactly trust her if you watch the God tier list I made the other week. And lots of people are asking why, and I've decided that needs a lot of fleshing out and a lot of talking, so rest assured, Logic is going to be getting her own separate video, because she's really complex and she means a lot of things inside this universe that we just don't have answers to yet. And her behaviors are really red flaggish, as weird as that is to say for a deity,
but the way she used his deception and the hive mind implications that come from her, there's a lot to be questioned with. So you guys just wait. She will get more information, at least on my end.
Series was meant to be a primer for understanding the universe of Fear and Hunger. And what a gift this has been to be able to reevaluate that which I already know and that which I love. And the gift that I've gotten to learn from you guys and learn my own mistakes and maybe even things I have looked over. It's been wonderful to do this with all of you. However, as this was a primer to the universe, I have not gotten the chance to delve into all my theories regarding individual events or my theories on how certain deities will actually act. Furthermore, as the game gets updates, several things will become more clear. I absolutely will be amending many of these videos to reflect that information, and many of these gods will probably have so much information after the update that I will be able to make videos about them all by themselves. So, this may be the end of this series, but it is not the end of our time in Fear and Hunger. No. There is far more left to explore and far more left to understand. But, for now, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Drop a comment. I read and respond to nearly all of them, ADHD depending. And of course, subscribe here. Follow me on my other socials. And if you want to, I'm streaming Vampire the Masquerade in the World of Darkness, and it is likely the next series I will be delving into. Well, next is in simultaneously. And also, if you want to hang out with some more cool people who like talking about Fear and Hunger and other video games, join the community Discord. I'm in there pretty often, yapping my yams. But in any case, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are at in the world, and thank you so much for stopping by the Stygian Study. Toodles!